Well, back on the Greenway, and I just ended up having an incredible conversation. The car is leaving right now, but I got out of my van there, and there was a big old fellow. Man, he had a little ponytail, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he actually had a T-shirt on that said, "Welcome to Sin City." It was a Sin City shirt. And I don't know, I had just put a Steps to Christ in my backpack, and I prayed, and it was had a very interesting cover on it. It was one of these Steps to Christ that it was like a man's cover. I've got all different types of covers to my Steps to Christ, and this one was like a man's cover. So I didn't think I'd end up in a whole conversation with this guy, but I did. I'm like, oh, what kind of T-shirt is that? And he laughed and he said, well, I actually belong to a motorcycle gang and Sin City. And I'm like, really? A real motorcycle gang? He's like, oh, yeah. I said, well, how long have you been part of the motorcycle gang? He said, about 10 years. I said, well, what made you join the gang? And he says, well, brotherhood. And I said, yeah, brotherhood. I said, you know what? It's funny that you say that, because I said, God created us to want to be with others. I mean, we're created that way. I said, one flesh, right? He said, yeah, absolutely one flesh. And I said, so we can't really get away from that yearning. And that's how we're designed. And he says, yep, you're right. And he says, it's kind of funny because, here we're all alpha males. He said, yeah, alpha males. And he said, we all want to be first, and we all, and that's how we are. And yet, here we are, and that's how we seek brotherhood. I said, well, men and women, God designed us very differently. And so I said, I'm not a girly girl, and I'm kind of a tomboy, but I do need female companionship because it's only a female that can give me what I need. And he said, you're right. He said, because it's the same thing with guys. We don't understand women, and only us men, we get each other. And he said, there is a stark difference between what we can give each other. He said, women are designed very differently from us men. He said, I can't provide what a woman provides. And I'm like, exactly. And then we talked about a little bit about how, the children now are just so confused because, they're 10 years old and they're being asked to choose what they think they are. And I'm like, when you're 10 years old, you're not even playing with dolls, but, the teacher's saying, no, Tommy, what do you think you are? What do you want to be? Boy, girl, he, she? And I'm like, and he's like, yeah, it's crazy. And so he elaborated a little bit more. I told him I was a missionary. And, I told him, how God has just transformed my life. And then I was surprised. He said, he says, I'm walking with the Lord. He said, I'm going to tell you this. He said, I was a worshiper of Satan for a long time. I'm like, what? He said, oh yeah, Satan, all the way, Satan. And he said, but I found God, I found Jesus. And he said, I've got him. And I know I'm covered in the blood. I couldn't believe it. And he said, it's funny because just not too long ago, I had a brother say, I think you're not with the Lord. And I told him, I said, what do you mean I'm not with the Lord? He says, I just think you kind of got off track. And he says, I'm telling you something, brother. I may turn my back sometimes, but God is right there. He's right there. He don't leave me. So all I need to do is turn back around and he's there. I couldn't believe it. It was such an incredible conversation. And then he elaborated on what his motorcycle club does. They do a lot of charity work. They raised $18,000 to a little girl that was diagnosed with cancer. I mean, it was really incredible. He says, there's the Hells Angels, and he says there's all these other motorcycle gangs. And he says, you know what? I just say, you do what you're going to do. But if you get too close to me, and then he went to his backpack and he said, I'll knuckle you. He says, I'll break your jaw. But he says, we just need to focus on, instead of looking at each other, these motorcycle gangs, he says, you just do what you're going to do. Because we're over here doing our thing. And we don't do drugs and we don't drink. And, and they're serving the Lord. So that was incredible to have that conversation with that guy. His name was Junior. And then it was funny because then I reached into my bag, here's my bag, and I took out the Steps to Christ that had that cover, and it was, it had like a trophy on it and a racing flag. And I'm like, you're not going to believe this. I said, I just prayed over this book, and it's like a man's man cover. And he's like, oh, well, thank you. But anyway, and we both agreed. I said, it's not by accident that I'm a missionary. And then I got out and we started talking. And I said, I think God wanted to tell you today that you're exactly where you need to be. Because he told me about how he left the church. Apparently for many, many years, he says, I went down the whole church thing. He said, I'm not telling you not to go to church. We're not supposed to forsake assembly. But he says, our preacher was getting paid $120,000. The assistant preacher was getting paid $90,000. He said, oh, then the junior preacher was also getting paid, $80,000. And he says, that's all the money that could have went to do kingdom work. And he said, I was just sick of it, to see all that money. He says, it's just ridiculous. And he said, so I resigned as deacon, and I had a talk with the preacher. He said, and I went my own way. And I said, well, I'm kind of out on my own too. And the Lord took me out of these lifestyle centers that I worked for. And I said, I saw the slave labor. I saw how much they were charging to heal people. And I just didn't like it. And, and then we get this tiny stipend and we're doing all the work as missionaries. I said, I felt the same way. And the Lord took me out of that work. So we really hit it off. I mean, we really did. And we needed that affirmation from God today. That God has us both where we need to be, preaching his word and his gospel and doing his work. So prayers and thumbs up for Junior. And say a prayer for his ministry. That's Sin City. Yep. God can use everybody. Smoking cigarette ponytail, Sin City. He's using him in a big way. Pretty cool, isn't it?